I was so fascinated with Elon Musk's recent SpaceX talk, I wanted to do a quick video of it. I've summarized his talk in a short video.
Fundamentally, the future is vastly more exciting and interesting if we're a spacefaring civilization and a multi-planet species than if we're not. You want to be inspired by things. You want to wake up in the morning and think the future is going to be great. And that's what being a spacefaring civilization is all about. It's about believing in the future and thinking that the future will be better than the past. And I can't think of anything more exciting than going out there and being among the stars. Searching for the right name, but the code name at least is BFR. Probably the most important thing that I want to convey in this presentation is that I think we have figured out how to pay for it. How do we pay for this thing? We went through various ideas, Kickstarter, collecting underpants. These didn't pan out. Essentially, we want to make our current vehicles redundant. We want to have one system, one booster and ship that replaces Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, and Dragon. The Raptor engine will be the highest thrust-to-weight engine, we believe, of any engine of any kind ever made. The next key element is propulsive landing. So in order to land on a place like the moon, where there is no atmosphere and certainly no runways, or to land on Mars, where the atmosphere is too thin to land, even if there were runways, to land with a wing, you really have to get propulsive landing perfect. So that's what we've been practicing with Falcon 9. So this is just a series of landing videos. I think these are quite mesmerizing. But we now have 16 successful landings in a row. And that's with I think we can get to a landing reliability that is on par with the safest commercial airliners. We believe the precision at this point is good enough for propulsive landing that we do not need legs for the next version. It will literally land with so much precision, it will land back on its launch mounts. Taking the idea of establishing a self-sustaining base on Mars or the moon or elsewhere, seriously, you need ultimately thousands of ships and tens of thousands of retanking or refilling operations, which means you need many launches per day. Approximately 60 orbital launches occur per year, which means if SpaceX does do something like 30 launches next year, it'll be approximately half of all orbital launches that occur on Earth. A key technology is automated rendezvous and docking. So in order to retank or refill the spaceship in orbit, you have to be able to rendezvous and dock with the spaceship with very high precision and transfer propellant. So that's one of the things that we've perfected with Dragon. Dragon 1 will do an automated rendezvous and docking without any pilot control to the space station. Dragon 1 currently uses the Canadarm for the final placement onto the space station. Dragon 2, which launches next year, will not need to use the Canadarm. So Dragon 2 will directly dock with the space station. And it can do so with zero human intervention. So you just press go, and it will dock. So Falcon 1, this is where we started out. But Falcon 1 was quite a small rocket. When we're doing Falcon 1, we're really trying to figure out what is the smallest useful payload that we could get to orbit. I thought, okay, something around half a ton to orbit would be able to launch, that can launch a decent-sized small satellite to low Earth orbit, and that's why we sized Falcon 1. But it's really quite small compared to Falcon 9. So Falcon 9, particularly when you factor in payload, Falcon 9 is many times more, it's sort of on the order of 30 times more payload than Falcon 1. And Falcon 9 has reuse of the primary booster, which is the most expensive part of the rocket. Hopefully towards the end of this year we'll be launching Falcon Heavy. It sounds like it should be easy because it's 2 first stages of Falcon 9s strapped on as boosters. So Falcon Heavy ended up being much more a new vehicle than we realized. Now beginning serious development of BFR. So you can see the payload difference is quite dramatic. BFR in fully reusable configuration, without any orbital refueling, we expect to have a payload capability of 150 tons to low Earth orbit. So, and that compares to about 30 for Falcon Heavy. BFR, you can get a sense of scale by looking at the tiny person there. It's really quite a big vehicle. Main body diameter is about 9 meters or 30 feet. And it consists of the booster is lifted by 31 RAPTOR engines that produce a thrust of about 5,400 tons, lifting a 4,400 ton vehicle straight up. So then, just the basics about the ship: 48-meter length, dry mass we're expecting to be about 85 tons. So you can think of this as essentially combining the upper stage of the rocket with Dragon. It's like the Falcon 9 upper stage and Dragon were combined. You've got obviously the engine section in the rear, the propellant tanks in the middle, and then a large payload bay in the front. And that payload bay is actually 8 stories tall. So let's look at a couple of things in detail. So the cargo area has a pressurized volume of 825 cubic meters. This also is greater than the pressurized area of an A380. So really is capable of carrying a tremendous amount of payload. In a Mars transit configuration, since you'd be taking 3 months in a really good scenario, but maybe as much as 6 months, some number of months, single digit months, you probably want a cabin, not just a seat. So the Mars transit configuration consists of 40 cabins, and it sort of depends on, you could conceivably have 5 or 6 people per cabin if you really wanted to cram people in. But I think mostly we would expect to see 2 to 3 people per cabin. And so normally about 100 people per flight to Mars. And then there's a central storage area, galley, and a solar storm shelter, entertainment area, and this is where the propellant is located. Subcooled methane and oxygen. In the fuel tank are header tanks. So when you come in for a landing, your orientation may change quite significantly, so you can't have the propellant just slushing around all over in the main tanks. You have to have the header tanks that can feed the main engines with precision. Then the engine section. Four vacuum Raptor engines and 2 sea-level engines. And you can land the ship with either one of the 2 center engines. So when you come in for a landing, it will light both engines, but if one of the center engines fails at any point, it will be able to land successfully with the other engine. So we want the landing risk to be as close to 0 as possible. About a 330 ISP at sea level. The upper stage engine is 375. Now, this is version 1, so I think over time there's potential to increase that specific impulse by 5 to 10 seconds, and as I was mentioning, also increase the chamber pressure by 50 bar or so. And then for refilling, where you just saw the 2 shifts would actually mate at the rear section. They would use the same mating interface that they use to connect to the booster on liftoff. So we'd reuse that mating interface and reuse the propellant fill lines that are used when the booster is, when the ship is on the booster. And then to transfer propellant, it becomes very simple. Use control thrusters to accelerate in the direction that you want to empty. So, if you accelerate in this direction, propellant goes that way, and you transfer the propellant very easily into from the tanker to the ship. This gives you sort of a rough sense of rocket capability, starting off at the low end with the Falcon 1 at a half ton, and then going up to BFR at 150. So I think it's important to note that the BFR has more capability than Saturn V, even with full reusability. But here's the really important fundamental point. Let's look at the launch cost. The order reverses. Now, at first glance, this may seem ridiculous, but it's not. The same is true of aircraft. If you bought, say, a small single-engine turboprop aircraft, that would be $1.5 to $2 million. To charter a 747 from California to Australia is $500,000, there and back. The single-engine turboprop can't even get to Australia. So a fully reusable system, a fully reusable giant aircraft like a 747 costs a third as much as an expendable tiny aircraft. In one case, you have to build an entire aircraft. In the other case, you just have to refuel something. So it's really crazy that we build these sophisticated rockets and then crash them every time we fly. This is mad. And often I'll be told, but you could get more payload if you made it expendable. I say, yes, you could also get more payload from an aircraft if you got rid of the landing gear and the flaps and just parachute it out when you got to your destination. But that would be crazy, and you would sell 0 aircraft. So reusability is absolutely fundamental. Now I want to talk about the value of orbital refilling. This is also extremely important. So if you just fly BFR to orbit and don't do any refilling, it's pretty good. You'll get 150 tons to low Earth orbit and have no fuel to go anywhere else. However, if you send up tankers and refill in orbit, you can refill the tanks all the way to the top and get 150 tons all the way to Mars. Automated rendezvous and docking and refilling, absolutely fundamental. The size of this being a 9-meter diameter vehicle is a huge enabler for new satellites. We can actually send something that is almost 9 meters in diameter to orbit. So for example, if you want to do a new Hubble, you could send a mirror that has 10 times the surface area of the current Hubble as a single unit. It doesn't have to unfold or anything. Or you can send a large number of small satellites. You can do whatever you like. You can actually also go around and, if you wanted to collect old satellites or clean up space debris, you can just use the sort of chomper over there and go around and collect satellites or collect space debris if you want. It enables launching of Earth satellites that are significantly larger than anything we've done before, or significantly more satellites at a time than anything that's been done before. It's also intended to be able to service the space station. I know it looks a little big relative to the space station, but the shuttle also looked big. So it'll work. It'll be capable of doing what Dragon does today in terms of transporting cargo, and what Dragon 2 will do in terms of transporting crew and cargo. It can also go obviously much further than that, like for example the moon. Based on the calculations we've done, we can actually do lunar surface missions with no propellant production on the surface of the moon. So if we do a high elliptic parking orbit for the ship and retank in a high elliptic orbit, we can go all the way to the moon and back with no local propellant production on the moon. So I think that would enable the creation of moon base alpha or some sort of lunar base. Yeah, it's quite captivating. Yeah, but so this will enable the creation of a lunar base. And it's 2017. I mean, we should have a lunar base by now. What the hell's going on? And then, of course, Mars, becoming a multi-planet species. Beats the hell out of being a single planet species. So, yeah, so we'd start off by sending a mission to Mars, where it would be obviously just landing on rocky ground or dusty ground. And it's the same approach that I mentioned before, which is you send the spaceship up to orbit, you retank it or refill it until it has full tanks, and it travels to Mars, lands on Mars. For Mars, you will need local propellant production. But Mars has a CO2 atmosphere and plenty of water ice. That gives you CO2 and H2O, so you can make, therefore, CH4 and O2. Criticism for why are you using combustion in rockets and you have electric cars? Like, well, there isn't some way to make an electric rocket. I wish there was. So you can go all the way from the surface of Mars to the surface of Earth just using the ship. And I'll show you so this is a true physics simulation. Because Mars has an atmosphere, albeit not a particularly dense one, you can remove almost all the energy aerodynamically. And we've proven out supersonic retropropulsion many times with Falcon 9, so we feel very comfortable about that. But the size of the cone gives you a rough approximation for how much thrust the engines are producing. That's not a typo. Although it is aspirational. We've already started building the system. The tooling for the main tanks has been ordered. The facility is being built. We will start construction of the first ship around the second quarter of next year, so in about 6 to 9 months, we should start building the first ship. I feel fairly confident that we can complete the ship and be ready for a launch in about 5 years. 5 years seems like a long time to me. Yeah. But that's our goal, is to try to make the 2022 Mars rendezvous. Earth-Mars synchronization happens roughly every 2 years. So every 2 years there's an opportunity for to fly to Mars. So then in 2024, we want to try to fly 4 ships, 2 of which would be crewed, and 2 of which two cargo and two crew. The goal of these initial missions is to find the best source of water. That's for the first mission, and then the second mission, the goal is to build the propellant plant. So we should, particularly with 6 ships, there have plenty of landed mass to construct the propellant depot, which will consist of a large array of solar panels, very large array, and then everything necessary to mine and refine water, and then draw the CO2 out of the atmosphere, and then create and store deep cryo CH4 and O2. Then build up the base, starting obviously with one ship, then multiple ships, then start building out the city, then making the city bigger, even bigger. Yeah, and over time, terraforming Mars and making it really a nice place to be. Thanks. Give me a... But there's something else. If you build a ship that's capable of going to Mars, Well, what if you take that same ship and go from one place to another on Earth? So, yeah, so the great thing about going to space is there's no friction. So once you're out of the atmosphere, you will go, it will be smooth as silk, no turbulence, nothing. There's no weather, there's no atmosphere. And you can get to most long distance places, like I said, in less than half an hour. And if we're building this thing to go to the moon and Mars, then why not go to other places on Earth as well? All right, thank you.
If you like the work I do on this channel, please don't forget to subscribe by clicking on that handsome guy at the bottom of the screen. And if you really like the channel, you can always donate to it on my Patreon page that's also listed at the bottom. I wanted to give a shout out to my son's YouTube channel, The Nerd Writer. He does some very insightful video essays. I think you'll like them. His video on Black Mirror this week was pretty interesting. Check it out.